Hey everybody, welcome back to the Triad Table. Everybody give a wave. We're so excited to be here. Our last Triad Table talk, we talked about closed adoption. It was emotional, it was raw, there was a lot of tears, but it was beautiful, of course, to get all these different perspectives and opinions. We felt it was a natural move to now cover open adoption. Much like in our closed adoption talk, we all have stories, or we know someone in an open adoption, or maybe we are in an open adoption. So just by way of definition, right, an open adoption is in which the biological and the adoptive families have access to varying degrees to each other's personal information and have contact. So that looks different for everybody. There's no one size fit all. Open adoption is tricky, much like closed adoption. It comes to struggles and trials. So now, if you follow my story, you know that I'm in an open adoption. My open adoption has shifted this way, that way. In the beginning, I wanted little contact in open adoption, and now I want way more than is, on the table. So as I said, open adoption is ever flowing, shifting. So first person I want to go to in the Triad Table is Ashley. What comes to your mind when you hear the term open adoption, and how has it played a role in your life?
Wow. Thanks for that question. So it's been really interesting. For those that don't know, I placed my son, Derek, 14 and a half years ago. He'll be 15 in the spring. And we did not start out open. If you watched our closed adoption series, you will know that we definitely went through a lot of our Jerry Springer stuff, but we have a beautiful, amazing open adoption relationship right now that includes sleepovers and all the things. But it was never something, if you would have told me in the hospital 14, and a half years ago that he was going to be coming back and staying at my house, I would have thought you were crazy. Like that would have never been something that I could have thought long-term. I know for a birth mother myself, like we have these very specific fears that we think about, at birth. And it was like, is he going to hate me? Did I pick the wrong family? Like little things like that. But I didn't know that 14 years later, he was going to like me and want to hang out with me. And I was going to have other kids and he was going to want to have a relationship. And so there's so much unknown about open adoption. And because every individual triad relationship is so unique and different, it's so hard to have these kinds of conversations because what works for one is not what's going to work for another. But I know at the end of the day that if Derek wants to come and see me, we make it happen and it's amazing. And I know some people hear sleepovers and they're like, oh my gosh, kidnapping and like all this crazy stuff. And it's just like, I never wanted that. Actually, there was a few adult adoptees in my parents' neighborhood that actually were like, I never wanted to know my biological parents. I never cared to know who they were. And so I kind of grew up with some of that mindset that you're going to place this child and the adoptive parents are going to raise them and they're not going to be curious about you. They're not going to ask questions. They're not going to want to know you. And I grew up with adult adoptees around me that grew up in kind of that era of closed adoption where I don't know that they felt that, but it was never something they wanted to pursue. And I know, and I'm not speaking for adoptees, but I know that there's a lot of adult adoptees that never wanted to pursue that. And so I'd be interested to hear from the other adoptees here. So when I was making this choice, they were really like, it's going to be fine. You're going to choose this family and they're going to become their family and you are going to be irrelevant. And I really believed that if I look back now, I would slap the crap out of me if I could go back and talk to me like 14 years ago. But I really believed that if my son didn't need me or didn't have questions about me, that I picked the right family and I made all the right choices. And it's so interesting now to sit in the kind of relationship that I have with my son to be like, how could I ever think that he that I was just going to remove myself from the picture, thinking that if I was not present, then it would be better. And he wouldn't need me if he didn't ask about me. And if he never asked about me. And I think that's a very ignorant, uneducated mindset from my perspective, but I didn't know. And so I'm so glad that his parents were like a dog with a bone, and we're like, I don't care what you say or want, I'm actually not going anywhere. And so they remained faithful and consistent, and it's been amazing. And I know we have a lot of hard things coming up, and he's going to be 15, and I don't know anything about 15-year-old boys, but we're in it. And so it's great. But it was so interesting how my mind has shifted from really believing that if he didn't need me, then I made the right choice, to now he needs me and we're making the right choice. And that's cool to watch that transition happen.
I think that that's the big evolution, right? That open adoption changes. Things can go from closed to open. Things can go from open to closed. Now, I just want to ask a quick clarification question on this. So does Derek, like, what age did he decide that he wanted more, that he wanted to get to know you, he wanted sleepovers?
So we've talked about this before. So I'm sorry if you're hearing this message again, but I really believe that open adoption was, it started as this communication between the moms. Okay. Typically the connection between the mothers is a little more natural. So I talk, because she was the one that was texting me. I wasn't texting his dad. His dad's amazing, but him and I weren't navigating visits and things like that. And so it was definitely between adoptive mother and birth mother. And I thought that was what open adoption meant, was that the two moms were, navigating and sending pictures and things like that. And I was in, I was in a Barnes and Noble in Arizona when Derek was 9, and he texted me from his mom's phone, and he was like, "Hey, this is Derek. I miss you." And I was like, "Does your mom know you're texting me? You should not be texting me. Like, this isn't how this works. It's usually between his mom and me." And so I called her and I was like, "Derek's texting me." She was like, "Yeah, it's my phone. I know." And I was like, "Okay." And it was then that it was like, oh, now we have an open adoption, because now Derek had an opinion. And he went to his mom that day and said, "I miss Ashley. Can I send her a message?" And it instantly, just that quickly, changed what open adoption actually meant. And our perspective changed so much that it was like, wow, this isn't actually about the moms. It's about him, like it should be. But it was mind blowing to watch that shift so quickly, that one text, all of a sudden we went, okay, Derek has an opinion. And then when he turned 10, he turned 10, they processed, and he asked for a sleepover. And they came to me and said, he wants to come and sleep over. And I was like, what? No, we don't do sleepovers. What? We meet at the park and at a public restaurant. And I had not spent the night with him under the same roof since the hospital. It had been a decade since I had been under the same roof alone with him overnight. And the last time I did that, I was crying over him and saying goodbye to him. And I was like, what? And he asked me in November, and it took me clear until the next April to say yes to that, because I was so freaked out by what that actually meant. But those 9 and 10-year-old ages for us were like, okay, this is what open adoption looks like, and this is what it's actually about. And it's been life-changing for us, because it's been about serving what he needs and not what the moms want, what's easy for the moms.
I got a little emotional there, because I crave for the day that my son does that. And I really hope and pray to whatever is out there that happens for me. If it doesn't, I'm okay. But I really hope it does. So
I do want to say, sleepovers are not the expectation to be able to do open adoption well. You can have amazing open adoptions and not have sleepovers. I just want people to know that it doesn't have to look like that to be successful. we've worked really hard to get there and it works for us. But if that's not the extent of their impact.
Yep. So Claire, I know you've got a point to bring up, so I want you to address it.
Oh, so as I was listening to Ashley talk, which is why I love this Triad Table, because originally I was like, I'm not going to have anything to say about open adoption. I don't know anything about open adoption. As I was listening to you talk, Ashley, I was thinking in my head, and I think Carrie and I have talked about this too with contact agreements and stuff. And can we truly say adoptions are open if they don't include the adoptee's opinion and needs? Meaning that you kind of said, once he hit that 9 to 10 age and started having an opinion, now we're in an open adoption. Meaning that it wasn't closed before, you were still communicating. But I think that that's important because we get so stuck in these terms: closed, open, semi-open, semi-closed. And I think that in my mind, as I'm listening to you talk, and as I think about how I would define an open adoption, is when the adoptee's needs are also a respected part of these decisions. And their opinions are heard and their needs are processed. It doesn't mean that we get everything we want, right? No one ever gets everything they want, but it means that we're able to verbalize, like Derek was able to verbalize, like, I miss you and I want to see you. And it doesn't mean you give in all the time, but yeah, so food for thought.
Allison? We can't hear you.
Okay, well, until we can hear Allison, sorry. I just, yeah, Claire, I loved that discussion that we've had, and it's been something for us that we've been thinking about, and we've even rewritten our post-adoption contact agreement to add language about when the child, and I see where you're coming from, but I also challenge, like, I was sitting, I had a birth mom, I can call her a birth mom now. She gave birth last week and placed, and we were hanging out this morning and having lunch, and we were talking, and she, this is, not her first child, and her other children were adopted by a family member, and she isn't allowed to have anything to do with that child. She does, or both of those children. She doesn't know she knows where they live because it's a relative adoption. She doesn't know what her girl's favorite colors are. She doesn't know what they look like, other than the fact that she literally knows the school that they go to, and she will go every once in a while and watch them get out of the relative's car and go into school. And she gave birth last week, and already, the relationship that she and the adoptive mom in this situation, the adoptive mom's been sending pictures every day. And she's like, I know what my son looks like today versus yesterday. Because when they're newborns, they change instantly. And we were talking about the difference of that. And I think that there's got to be a place, and what you've done for me, Claire, and opening my eyes to that, and making sure we are giving a voice to adoptees in these agreements. I do want to say, I do think we can consider it open before even an adoptee has a voice, because the mama that I got to love on today, I mean, that was everything to her, to know those details, to have that peace of mind, to know her child is not in the foster care system, to know that her child, is eating, is healthy, went to the doctor this week, had his shots, all of those things, is being circumcised tomorrow. I mean, all of those things, so to me, I want to just throw that in there.
Allison, are we operating? No, we're still not operating. Let's give you a minute, and I just wanted to make a comment on that, because being a birth mother, And as I said, I'm in an open adoption. I talked about it last week. We have an agreement that allows for a certain amount of contact, pictures, whatnot. I get a lot of pictures. I get a picture book almost every month, just stocked full of everything. Like, my family was here last week, and my nieces and nephews, not by me asking, went and grabbed a picture of my son to hold him in the picture because they wanted him to be a part. They know who he is. And as I said, I want more, right? And I can't get it right now, but I used to travel to Los Angeles for work. And I, of course, know where they live because I've been there. And I used to go sit at the park and wait to hopefully catch a glimpse of my son because I needed him. So that, I feel like, and maybe Ashley, I don't know if you have heard this from a lot of other birth mothers, but that birth mother doing that, I've done that. Like, I have done that many, many, many times, just sat there and waited for a glimpse.
Yeah, it's been really interesting too, because I didn't go to his house. We live in the same state, and I didn't go to his house or know where he lived until he was 9. And I'll tell you what, you know, I had gotten pictures of like this kitchen table where they had pancakes. And I walked into that house and I saw that kitchen table, and to see the bed that he actually sleeps in and the kitchen table that he eats those pancakes in and things like that, you guys, I have to tell you, when that reality clicks, and there's so many beautiful things about open adoption, but there's so many things that are maybe more complicated. I have heard from birth mothers that have closed adoptions that a lot of times are like, man, there are things about open adoption that birth moms deal with that I'm glad I don't have to deal with. And when that reality clicked about this whole life that he lives in this actual surrounding that I know nothing about, it's a lot. It's a lot. And I'm so grateful to have those relationships, but there's so many realities for that first time experience, seeing his home and seeing everything that had just been kind of hypothetical, this imaginary land, you know, that I had created of where he lives and exists and what his life looks like. And then to actually see the bed he sleeps in and things like that, tangible stuff. Whew, it was a lot. And so sitting at the park, and like waiting to see him slide on that slide, like I feel that so deeply, so deeply.
What's the deal?
We got you. We got you, girl.
I was like, I'm just gonna not try if this doesn't work. Yeah, I just want to touch on the adoptee input for openness. I think that's so important to remember. I think though, so some adoptees will never verbalize. Some adoptees will never speak. They will be nonverbal or pre-verbal for a very long time, or for most of their life or all of their life. And that's where, but there are some things that, based on humanity and the nature of the human brain and the mind and the primal wound theory and these things, there are some things that we can, at least when they're young and or unable to express their wishes about these things, there are some things that we can assume in terms of openness. And that's why that connection between when it's available and safe, etc., between the mothers, often it's the mothers, like Ashley said, should not be, in my opinion, I agree with Claire, it should not be primary when we're talking about an open adoption. Like, the relationship between the moms isn't the primary thing, but if that is a foundation for collaborating and thinking about, okay, what do we know about this child? What do the two of us know about this child that would help us see what kind of openness would be best? You know, like my son who we adopted doesn't have the language skills to express his wishes. It's like guess and check sometimes. Like, his birthday was this weekend, and we told him he was going to get to see his siblings, and because we FaceTimed and see his birth parents. And I didn't get to really, the way that other people tell you to process with a 6-year-old that experience, that conversation is not something that we can have. We have to pay closer attention and read in different ways. And so I think that when we talk about what is the adoptee verbalizing, it's like we have to remember sometimes they won't. And so that relationship between mothers becomes maybe even more important in those cases, because I know that my relationship with both Birthmother is like foundational to our open adoption, and we have a very open adoption. So yeah, I just wanted to add that perspective, because I think sometimes we forget that that developmental assumption is not always going to be the case.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And some of the feedback that I've gotten after my visits, because my son will be 7, so he's still young, he's Bo's age, right? And some of the feedback that I get from my son's mom is that when I leave, it's hard for him. He doesn't express that he doesn't want me there, or that he doesn't love me, or all these things, but he can't transition back to normal life. Like he can't always get back on his routine right away. So there are times when my visits get rejected because he has big things coming up. And to disrupt that routine during that time when you know he's going to have this reaction for a couple of days, maybe a week, like we have to be thoughtful about that. So I think that's such a good point to bring up, that like you have to be able to watch the nonverbals and just the reactions, because they're not always going to say, I don't want to see this person, or this is too hard. They might just show it in their actions.
Well, and I think the most important thing is the differentiation of the adoptive parent. When we ask, what's the fallout of this visit or whatever gonna be, we have to ask ourselves, am I making this decision based on what they will experience, or based on what I will experience having to pick up the pieces of the aftermath of it? Because and that's hard, because we're a family unit. So we have to, like the whole family is going to feel that if there are some hard feelings afterward. And so, but we have to really get honest. And that's why I always say being a good adoptive mom is about doing your own work, like inside of you, it's so much less about how you treat your child and all these parenting techniques. I'm like, you can't do those effectively unless you differentiate your own feelings about this adoption from the feelings that your child has. We can't keep projecting,
Well, and I have to say, and then I want to throw a question to Krista or Tina, because I resonate with that so much, because, my husband and I have 2 kids that we parent, that when Derek comes to visit, he's their older brother, and he walks on water with my kids worship their older brother. But I'll tell you, when he leaves, my son, especially my 8-year-old, is undone when his big brother leaves. And processing, my husband, we talk a lot about there's so much to consider. So many birth moms are like, oh, I would kill for this time. I would kill for a sleepover and things like that. But I'm in a position where my husband and I, Derek comes over and my kids are, and it's like, man, we don't understand these when we make these decisions to place our children, the generations that are affected by our choices. I did not know that my 8-year-old son was going to be forever affected by a choice that I made before I even could conceive the notion of my 8-year-old son. And that is huge. And processing that and bringing that back to say, how can we serve Derek, the adopted child, and still serve the kids that are affected and the parents that are affected? It's so much bigger than just this choice that happened 14 and a half years ago in a hospital with a freaking signature. It's ridiculous how much, like, people think we're joking when we say this is for life. This affects literally generations. Like, it's just mind-blowing to me. So I would love to hear from either Krista or Tina. I hope I'm taking over like the host spot, but I would just love to hear you guys from this perspective. I mean, Krista, obviously you're in an international adoption where this kind of turmoil, you got to share so much in the closed adoption video, and Tina in foster care. Like, I would love to hear both of your perspectives on open adoption and what this means, and the lack of open adoption, and how, I mean, I would love to hear from both of your perspectives. And then Andie, I know you're working up your closing over there, but we got to hear from you at some point.
Yeah, so I think kind of, Ashley, how you said that sometimes you hear from birth mothers who say, oh, that just sounds too overwhelming. I'm so glad I don't have to do that. That's me. Like, I'm not gonna lie to y'all, that sounds way too overwhelming. Like, I struggled so much to balance my relationship with my birth family from afar. I mean, 20 years with no communication, and counting, and the balance with bonding to my adoptive family, and actually adding in the relationship with my birth family. Like, literally, I don't want to do that. Like, it's just, if I could, and I say this all the time, if I could single out my mom, I would. Everyone else, no. And I think it just sounds so like emotionally overwhelming for me. And there's a lot of other factors too. And I think that kind of goes back to what you said, Ashley, about like when you sign that paper, like the effects that it has. And you talked about the effects on your other children, but you know, we haven't even mentioned like the external circumstances, which is what I live in. And those external circumstances cannot be changed easily. And I actually had another adoptee on Instagram reach out to me, and she was like, yeah, no, I know exactly what that's like. And that's the first adoptee that I've ever heard from that was like, yeah, no, the external circumstances of the choices that the family has made are so drastic that there can be no open adoption. And we haven't even touched on that. And so I think for me, that's a lot of what drives my fear to open adoption, and what makes me so hesitant and slow in my process now of even trying to even like send a letter to my mom. Like that, like sending a letter is something that I'm not sure I can even do. And it's not for me emotionally. It's just something that I'm not even sure will work or can happen. So it's interesting to see the contrast of where I am versus where, you know, FaceTiming birth parents and going to see people at the park. Like, that is not something that I could even imagine at all, because sending a letter is like putting myself out there more than I ever have in 20 years.
And I think that goes right back to the point that these are all, every single adoption is so different. Like, Tina, where you are right now is completely valid because that is your situation. Where I am is completely valid. Where Ashley is, where Andie is, where everybody is, we're all in this adoption world, the same world, but there is no situation alike. And how can we as a community come to support every single person on this call who's going through so many different emotions, going through the same thing, but in so many different ways. So I love this Triad Table, because look at all of these different feelings, emotions, stories that are coming, but yet we're coming together to support each other. Krista, I know that you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, Ashley, you want to repeat what you really want to hear from me? I don't know that I have much to say that I didn't already say in the closed adoption. To be honest, like, this conversation for me as an adoptive parent who is navigating a closed adoption internationally, which is a whole other thing. You're talking a different country, a different culture, all of those things. So for me personally, like, I enjoy sitting here and learning from all of you, but it's also like overwhelming for me. And I have found myself like choking back tears in this because Like, I know that these are things that my son is going to want that I can't give him. And so for me as a mom, that's very tough to swallow, because as moms, we want to give our kids the world, right? And I think for us, like, we've even weighed, like, do we try and search, even though he's so young, if he's asking questions, like, do we try and search? But then we also have to toe the line of, like, there's a different country, there's a different culture, and we don't want to ruin anything for him in the future. So if we overstepped something right now, especially culturally, would that ruin something that he could have in the future? And that's something we have to weigh. And that's hard because I want to be able to say, like, we can email her or whatever. I mean, like, we have social media and things like that. Like, we have options now, right? In the day and age technologically that we live in. Could we do something like Skype or Zoom or whatever? But because there are layers of complexity, I would be so upset to know that we did something that messed something up for him in the future. And going back to, I think, Claire's point of an adoptee having a say and having control, we really just want to follow his lead. And so is it too early at this point, when he's at age 6, almost 7, to even be making those kinds of decisions? I don't think so. So we just kind of have to sit and wait and wade through the hard complexity of what a closed adoption is. And honestly, like, actively pray for something to become open in the future. It's something that we regularly pray for as a family with him. But that is something that can happen one day if that's what he hopes and that's what he chooses. But I think for me as an adoptive parent, it kind of just what I touched on last time, it just goes back to me being the open one for him, because that's what I can give him right now. And so keeping that door open and as much as possible. So allowing, like, putting my feelings aside and allowing for him to grieve and not take it personal. Know that it's, like, not about me. And sometimes there are things that are said or done that it's hard in that moment not to take it personally, but I can't. And I have to, as Allison's point, like, be in a healthy place myself to be able to straddle that line well. And so anywho, I think if you are walking through a closed adoption or you don't have the opportunity, I think it's just really important for you as the parent to keep that open door and to be open and honest. And even if you don't have all the answers, just you be the open one and make it as much as possible an environment and a place and a relationship that they feel safe enough to let you know how they really feel. And ask them and have those conversations. They're not always going to tell you. So if there's something going on, straight up ask sometimes. Obviously I can't always control his responses, but I can control mine. And so that is something that I think is important as an adoptive parent, is to do your own work. So I'm, like, snotting everywhere, guys. Thanks.
Yes, I think that brings up such a good point, that you don't have an open adoption. It's an international adoption. You don't have that access, but you're creating an open adoption in your own situation. And I think that's a big thing that adoptive parents or hopeful adoptive parents can take from everything you just said, is that even if it's a closed adoption, you can still openly speak about what you know, right? Like, if you know information about the birth family, like, you can speak openly, or you can speak openly about anything you know. I think that's a really good point to bring up. I just wanted to touch, Ashley, do you want to?
I was just going to say, I love that point so much, because we get so caught up in open adoptions have to be about contracts and agreements and pictures and texts, and it has to look like this and look like this. But open adoption is about being open to the relationships and the people involved and having conversations. And we get so technical and transactional about these agreements and these checklists. And we're missing what the open heart, we are humans in these relationships. It's relational, not transactional. And the more focus we put on the checklist of what open adoption has to look like, and we check obligation, check sent the text, check we're missing the relational piece. And even in these closed adoptions, I love that you said that. And Krista, listening, you are keeping it open for conversation and connection. And that is open adoption to me.
Well, and just to piggyback on what you said, as the resident attorney here, I agree with what you said. So there you go. But I know, I lose my attorney card. Gee, there's a surprise. But I love what we have a home study caseworker, and one of the things she always says is to our clients or prospective adoptive parents in the home study process, but also when we're doing post placements, if you have to every month look at your post-adoption contact agreement to see if you are meeting all the requirements, you have missed the point of open adoption. You've missed it. So if you're just checking off things, then you've missed it.
Carrie, preaching to the choir. I love that I have this post placement agreement, because it gives me rights if they were ever tried to take it away. But gosh, if that thing gets thrown in my face one more time, that, oh, you actually already did have your 2 to 3 visits. It's nothing against his adoptive mom, his mother. It's I don't think she's educated in what this, how it can look. I mean, how many times have I been told, oh, according to the contract, I've been more than giving to you. It's like a swear word. And like, when I hear that, I think of just like, oh my gosh, how do I really can't hear it again. So I'm glad that is the message that you're pushing, because that's important. And Ashley, it's relational, not transactional. I wrote that down, and I'm putting that in my mental dictionary. Mental memory, whatever I'm trying to say. So Andie, you've been so silent, and I really enjoy when you speak. So whatever you want to say or comment on, we got to hear your voice.
I got notes.
The floor is yours.
I got notes on my census thing. Which, by the way, if you don't know, they now provide an adopted child box in the census. That's awesome. That's a complete side note. Actually, it's not, because the fact that they provide an adopted child box is directly related to open adoption. My biological grandfather did not have that option, so now we don't know where he came from. So this topic is really difficult for me. Extremely difficult. Like, I've been sitting here very quiet because I am having a very, 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 very visceral response to the point of feeling sick. My adoption was originally a very closed adoption. I was born 10 months after Michigan allowed open adoptions. But my adoption was chose by my biological family to be private and closed, because I was the second child to come from that family to be placed for adoption. I have an older cousin who was also placed. There was a lot of shame involved in why that was closed. So then I'll briefly run through the scenario. It was originally supposed to be closed, and then I had to have a surgery that was pretty serious. And my adoptive mother thought, I think I mentioned this in the last one, my adoptive mother thought that my mom should know what was going on. And so she sent a letter to the agency, and that kind of cracked the door. And long story short, there was letters back and forth between the mothers. And then when I was 14, I was allowed to start writing letters through the agency. And then my parents actually arranged for me to meet my bio mom as a surprise. Don't do that, by the way. Don't surprise your adoptee with meeting their biological parent. Like when I say surprise, I mean my entire biological family was there and I had no idea. I was literally like pushed into a room. Here's your mom. Come out of that room. Here's your whole family. And then I met my dad a year later. It has been 20 years since I met my mom and 19 years since I met my dad. I'm going to speak primarily about my relationship with my biological mother because my dad is just glad to be here whenever we get to see each other. There's nothing, it is what it is. I, as an adult, through a very, very long and hard set of circumstances, have chosen to close the door on my relationship with my mom. It's called secondary rejection, and it usually can be done by either party. We hear it most common with biological parents, where an adoptee will try to seek out their parent and the biological parent will say no or ignore it or have a relationship and then shut it down, which is kind of what happened to me, where the rejection came in the fact that her view of me was more about our story than it was me. I don't think to this day she could tell you one true statement about myself, except my physical appearance. I look exactly like her. And so when we talk about open adoption, it is all about relationship. Even though I've met my parents, even though I've met my biological mother, and I'm able to have some genetic mirroring because I have one cousin who I still speak to, and a sister that I have some contact with. I have those answers, and I know a lot of adoptees won't. Like, Krista, I think of your son, he will never have what I have in that sense. But is my adoption open? No. I can't get a straight answer out of my mom. She lies to me. She rejects me. When I was young and she would take us places. I mean, there was one time we were at a hospital for a surgery for my sister, and she was telling everybody our story without my consent. And it had nothing to do with me. It was, I'm the hero. Look what I did. I saved my child. I, put her in a family that was better. And now we have, reunification, and look how beautiful we are together. It was never, look how beautiful she is. And I know that is 100% because my mother is in pain and has her own trauma. I know that. And that is how I am able to work through that. That is why I support services for birth moms. But is my adoption technically open? Yes. Is it really? No. I can't get answers. I can't get closure. I will, for the rest of my life, question my very existence on this earth, because the one person who could give me that conversation, who could say, I love you, can't. So when we talk about open adoption, I sit in awe of Krista, who's able to have as much openness and honesty as she can give. My adoptive parents did that for me, and I have to sit with that, and I have to move on in my life. That's how my open adoption is going to look, because it is all about relationship. Just like you were saying, Carrie, you can check those boxes, you can do what you're asked to do, but if you aren't truly caring about your child's biological mother, if you aren't truly caring about your child, if you aren't truly caring about the adoptive parents, if we're not working together in this triad, it's not openness. That's a legal system.
Can I ask something really quickly? Because you're bringing up something that's something we as a team go back and forth on, and I would love to get your thoughts and the other adoptees. We have moms, I don't know what it is about abiding love, but we don't really work with the women that get pregnant in college at the sorority house. That is not, I mean, our calling. I don't know. But a lot of the women we work with have drug addictions, have mental health issues. They cannot see beyond their own situation to look, you know, for what their child's needs are regarding visitation and stuff. And I've got one, and I go back and forth because I get the birth mom's position of, you know, well, she's always been like this. It's not like she suddenly changed. She's always been addicted. And visits have not been great because she just wants to make it all about her. And so the adoptive parents are weary about having those visits because he's getting older, you know, he's 3 and 4. And what is he, you know, interpreting? And the part of me feels that, but then also the other part of me is like, yeah, but she hasn't changed. You said yes to this, you know, she's the same woman she was. And I would love to get y'all's perspective of regarding open adoption and what is best for the child, and, you know, how do we navigate that in those situations?
You know, I went through a situation similar. My biological mom actually moved to my town and started coming to my church when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And my parents did everything they could. They were actually in relationship. They did not tell my mom and my grandfather who they were, but they were in relationship with them. I said this in the closed adoption one. My dad did surgery on my grandfather. So he's literally all in relationship with him. But for them, it came down to, I was 6. I couldn't protect myself. There's a difference between, for me, and this is just my experience from when I'm 6 and now. Even when I was 17 and 18, when I was meeting my parents, I was coming into my own and I got to make those decisions for myself. And I own a lot of that. There's a lot of stuff in my relationship with my biological mother that I have to own. And I have to say, I did that wrong. I didn't ask that question. I hurt her this way. And I have owned my crap. Trust me. But when it comes to how do you handle that when you're that young, I mean, I'm gonna put my social worker hat on here. You have to protect the child first, because again, that comes back to who is this adoption about? And it is about the child first and foremost, and protecting them, keeping them safe. And that includes mentally, because children will pick up on that instantly. And it obviously, to me, it's been so painful. And I was a teenager and a young adult. So to have a 6-year-old experience that rejection, they'll feel that. They will feel that deeply, and that will add to that primal wound. I see Allison raising her hand. I'm going to stop.
So I just have a quick question, Allison, before you jump in. I want to, so I guess, Carrie, I want some clarification. So are these adoptive families saying we want to cut off these visits because this birth mother is not behaving appropriately? If that's what they're saying, how can we change that? I mean, has a conversation with the birth mother happened? Has the adoptive family spoken to the birth mother and said, hey, these conversations make us uncomfortable and they're going to hurt our child that we share together. If we have another visit, we have to do this. Like, is that stuff taking place to ensure that contact does not get stopped?
Yeah, and Ashley, I'm going to ask you to jump in because you know what I'm dealing with here. So, I mean, now you don't know this exact situation, but you know where I'm coming from. Yeah, I mean, we've had those conversations, and we had plans of her going to rehab. We paid for a rehab for her to go to, and where she would get mental health and drug rehabilitation. But she chose not to. And we've always kept that door open, and we still love her as we did before. We've talked with her, but when we have those conversations, we're not dealing with, she's not at the table mentally healthy where she can see beyond herself. She sees that she should be able to grab him and hold him and never let him go for like 30 minutes. And that's not healthy. And I mean, Ashley, what are your thoughts regarding I'm trying to explain the situation and just this kind of mentality, because it isn't all people. I mean, y'all are amazing and healthy, because you're coming to the table with introspection and all of these things. And there's a huge majority of mamas that don't have that. And one of the reasons that they've chosen adoption is so that the child isn't in foster care, so that they can have updates, they can choose the family. And this is kind of that situation.
Yeah. I am not giving birth moms a free pass to be an asshole. Okay. I'm really not. But I think there is such an issue on the front end of all of this, of hopeful adoptive parents coming to the table that say yes to things that they don't actually understand and actually don't have any experience around. And when they say, oh, we're going to say yes to everything because it's about just loving a child and that's all that matters. Guys, if I think, and I'm speaking specifically from a Christian culture, so please hear me when I say I'm talking about a very specific community. I think it's very difficult for adoptive parents that would never actually associate or understand or be in the same social class or economic class or any of it to actually interact with a lot of the birth moms in this country. And this is not a slam on the birth moms. It's on the fact that our diversity isn't just about race. We don't have interaction with people that are different than us. And I'm sorry, but birth moms that come to the table in crisis pregnancy are going to be different than you. And when you make this about, I don't want to bring this person into my life that could disrupt what is safe in our mindset, we are not getting adoption. We're not getting open adoption. And I don't care what you think is safe. You can still have a relationship with her if she's behind bars, if she's an addict, if she's in recovery, if she works at the strip club, I don't care. I don't care. And this takes so much work. And I'm not saying that you're going to hear this and be like, yes, we care about her. And of course she's important, but there is deep rooted concern for hopeful adoptive parents to love somebody that is so extreme and different from themselves. But it's the child's mother. And if you said yes to her, was that because it gave you a better option to get a baby quicker? Or was it because you were actually saying yes to her and everything that came with her? We have to be honest about what that looks like, because if it makes you more accessible to pregnant mothers, we're going to have a problem. You and I are going to have a problem.
And I think that's why I asked for that clarification, Ashley. So I knew that you would say that, and I'm glad you did. Because here's the thing is, when I hear that a family wants to close an adoption, or I hear that contact wants to be limited, that happened to me. I mean, I'm sitting in a home that I bought because I got a great job and I did all these things. But 5 years ago, I was doing drugs and I was doing all these different things and getting my visits with my son removed for a while because I lost control after I had been on a 2-day bender when my son's mother told me no. I lost control because of all these different things. I put myself back in that situation when she had said to me, we need to do therapy first. That's a big difference between let's cut the relationship. But I just think about, you go into adoption knowing that birth mothers are higher risk for drug addiction, for addiction, many, many things, right? There are many, many things. So when you go in there and you choose to make an adoption plan with an expectant mother, take her child home, that birth mother is in your life forever. I don't give a shit, excuse my language, I don't give a shit if she holds up a grocery store and goes to jail. That is your child's mother. I am my son's mom. And if anybody ever tried to take that away from me, I don't even know what I would do. I can't put into words, because how dare they take my child away from me when we knowingly went into an open adoption, hugged, said we loved each other and we'd always be in each other's lives. Like, that's her child, your child, her child, the same. It's the mother. I just think, like, how dare parents think that they have a right to close an adoption. Of course, we know there's very, very, very tough circumstances where it's not an option. Safety, extreme safety. But because somebody is a selfish person, come on, we can have a conversation. We're grown-ups. Like, we can sit there and have a conversation, or get a counselor to come mediate and say, hey, listen, we know that these are issues for you. We think it's going to harm the child. Let's figure out how we can have a healthy visit. That's what my son's mom did for me. And I just think that you can't cut the mother out, because that's his freaking mom. Okay.
Yeah. And Hope, I'm just like, really, and I'm going to pass this to Claire in a second, because she made a great comment in the chat, and I want her to comment on this. But it's like, and again, I'm not giving a free pass to the birth moms, but at the same time, I'm like, we got knocked up. It's a crisis. But you think we'd be coming to the table for adoption if we didn't have shit going on? Come on. You think that we are still giving you a gift. We are not a surrogate for you. We aren't doing this out of the goodness of our hearts. And if you can't get past that mentality and actually see the pregnant women, you aren't ever going to do this well. You will close it in a bad text message, because you actually think that I gave you a service and a gift. That is not what this is about.
One thing, Ashley, if I hear, almost on a regular basis, I hear, what a great gift you gave. What a selfless thing you did. What a gift. Oh, Claire, over to you.
So to piggyback on that, I'm not an object. So I'm not a gift that you put in a box with a bow on and gave it to a parent. So let's just eliminate that vocabulary permanently from our, usage. Adoptees are not gifts. We are not objects. We are not things. We are humans. And when I'm hearing Hope talk and Ashley talk and Carrie talk about these problematic relationships, and I don't use problematic to mean it in a negative tone. I just mean that there are external issues that are influencing the ability for a relationship to occur. We have to know that a expectant mother, like Ashley said, wouldn't be making an adoption plan if everything in her life was going really well. Like, you just wouldn't. And when adoptive parents are stepping up and saying yes to this relationship, there's going to be bumps in the road. And I'm not saying that to diminish drug addiction, jail, any of those mental health issues. I'm not trying to diminish those, but we're going to have to deal with some of that crap, guys. And guess what? You cannot use your child as the pawn to hold it over that birth mother's head like a carrot. You can't. Like, when I'm hearing Hope talk, like, well, if you're healthy, then maybe you can see your kid. Like, no. Because guess what, guys? Just because you're not addicted to drugs or incarcerated or have a mental health problem, I guarantee you that not everyone's adoptive parents are completely healthy either. So I'm just saying that we are all dealing with our own crap. And I don't believe that some of these situations that we're talking about warrant completely closing an adoption because the child's mother is not in the same life place as you are. Because if she was, you wouldn't have that child that is sitting in front of you. You wouldn't. Because they wouldn't have needed to place that child in a different family. So that's
Claire
all.
over there spitting some knowledge. I mean, I think that we were all I'm bowing down to so many of you today, because I just think this conversation is so important.
And I kind of wish they could see our comments here. That's one of the reasons.
I know. And
I don't wish they could see it.
Seriously. I mean, I love the fact that you said that adoptive parents aren't healthy either. I mean, I've got a lot of learned behaviors from my parents. That's pretty messed up. I know a lot of people who had pretty freaking unhealthy parents. Doesn't mean that they weren't great parents, but there's some shit in there. Excuse my language. I apologize, but it is what it is. So I think, this has been such a great session. Does anybody have any last final knowledge to drop? Over to you.
I have something that has just been playing in my mind. I really think this all comes back a lot of times. Those of us who are in open adoptions or maybe considering open adoptions, a lot of times it comes back to this desire for perfection and like to have a script or a narrative or a story and I think that's what the contract gives us. I think that's why we see adoptive parents going back to the contract and sticking to that. Something to check a box, like that's what we want. And actually, I recently listened to a podcast that someone directed me to that said that that's part of white supremacy. It was Hannah at Hey TRA. She talked about how white supremacy loves perfectionism. And so just that's a side note. It's important that we recognize that. But like this striving for perfectionism and this need for perfectionism is what's going to keep you from having a healthy open adoption. It has to be pliable. It has to grow with every human that's involved with it. And that is a lot of humans, and it has to be adoptee centered the whole time. So yeah, I think that moving away as much as possible from this idea that there's a way to do it and that there'll be boxes you can check to be a good adoptive mom in an open adoption. This is for the hopeful adoptive parents. Let that go. And that's transactional. Like Ashley said, it's got to be relational, not transactional.
Beautifully said. Tina?
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I think, I put some things in the chat, but I'm going to try to be really vague about this. But so going back to like adoptive parents being uncomfortable with the differences that they see in their child's parents, I would just like to say, like, in my story, I was in foster care and I had visitation with my mother because she was also in foster care, and we had visitations, which you're supposed to do. And we had several social workers present. We had law enforcement present. My mom was not behaving like some people would like her to. But those visits went on for like 4 years. So, in my opinion, that is an effort made to have that relationship. And if that can happen, your biological mother who's behind bars, your biological mother who, you can do it. Like, you just can, because that was so hard for me. Like, I remember that as a baby. Like, I remember the uncertainty. I remember the unpredictability of my mom and who she was. And my adoptive parents know that all that happened. But my mom has said to me again and again, I do not count your mother as inadequate. I count her as unsupported. So you cannot look at our moms and say that they're inadequate when they haven't had support. And I can say with 100% certainty that my mom didn't have the support she needed. And social workers tried, and everybody tried. But it was her family that was failing her. And, families have a lot more, families should be supporting. I mean, my family obviously didn't support me because, well, I was adopted, right? Well, her family didn't support her, so she couldn't keep me. Like, so we have to understand that it is not just the mom's issues. It's not. For many, it goes back generations, and that's how my family was. And I think to have my adoptive parents who held that viewpoint was so important, because then I could have more compassion towards my mom. And my adoptive parents were able to see that this wasn't just because she was not behaving. It was because she was failed. And that's why, she was the way she was. And I think it's very important to keep that perspective, because I think it makes a world of difference in how you approach that situation.
Thank you, Tina, for sharing that. I mean, I think a lot of us got teared up because at the end of the day, being a birth mother, I know I wasn't supported. I know what that feels like, to feel like I'm failing because I don't have the help to be the person that I need to be to show up for my son. I know what that feels like to not be supported before he was born and after, to feel like I'm failing as a mom or a birth mom because I can't show up the way that he deserves, and I can't do things in life that he deserves. I put so much pressure on myself every day to try to do that now. And when I did before, I mean, it ruined me because I didn't have the support and the education to know that feeling like a failure after you place your son for adoption, and that's normal. Like, it's normal to feel broken and lost and empty and like you want to die every day. Like, that is not abnormal, and I'm not alone, and there's support there for me. So I thank you for sharing that and for your compassion to your birth mother, regardless of what the situation was and the danger. Like, it means the world to hear that you have that compassion, and that your parents had that compassion for her as well. Who else?
I just want to say, I want to pass this to Krista, but to piggyback off of Hope, like, we're talking about these open adoption relationships and just wanting to be a part, like, let me be a guest appearance every once in a while of my son's life. Like, literally the thing that we're taught as women that we are meant to do and that we're supposed to be able to just step into in this natural motherhood, and then to feel completely crushed and not being able to accomplish this. And I know there's so many adoptive moms that will be able to relate to this that have come through infertility as well, but to sit in this space, to have everything about who I am as a person, as a design by God as a woman, to get pregnant and to have the ability to get pregnant and then to not feel capable or worthy to be able to raise our own children. And we're just over here begging for an opportunity to make a guest appearance. I don't know. Chris, I would love to hear you talk about your workbook, because I know people just are like, well, tell us what to do. And I'm just going, like, I'm on the window, like, just see me, like, help me. Like, I don't know. I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, shoot. How much we gonna cry today, y'all? Dang, I'm in a coffee shop, if you can't tell. Yeah, so kind of circling back to what Allison was saying about adoptive parents, and I want to say particularly for white adoptive parents, because I am one. One thing that I am working through myself right now and sifting through is this historical need, this culture historically of this need for perfection. We want rules so that because we don't want to be told we're doing something wrong. Nobody likes to be told that they're doing something wrong, but I'm sifting through this as a white woman, what the implications of that are, because I do think that there are implications of that for me being a white woman. So first of all, let me just say that. And so I am sifting through that myself. But yes, Ashley, to your point, so sorry for the plug. I didn't come, they asked y'all, just viewers, so you know, I wasn't like, hey, can I plug my book? No, this is like, okay. So yeah, so I wrote a workbook. It is a workbook, which means you gonna have to do work. Okay, that does not mean you're going to have all the answers. And to the point, like I learned just in my own journey, coming from the background of social work and then entering as an adoptive parent, learning so much of how much stuff I bring with me to the table. And I think this goes for any parent. Like we all have stuff with our parents because every parent brings something with them from past generations, right? But I think when you don't deal with your stuff as an adopted parent, you're bringing something very unique to the table with their relationship with your child and potentially the relationship with the birth family, if that is part of it, which it is, especially if you have an open adoption, right? But one thing that some people complain about is I make it pretty clear, I feel like, that it is a workbook. And so it's a book of questions. Like there are multiple sections, but every section has about 15 to 20 questions. So I like give you a little like, hey, here's an intro, here's a guide of what you're about to walk through. Now let's go through what this might look like for you. But I don't give you the answers because here's why. You have to do work. And sometimes I get messages from people who are mad at me that they buy the workbook and they open it and there's blank spaces for them to write in. Yeah, because you're supposed to do work. It's a workbook. And so sometimes I get these messages and they're like, okay, but where do I find the answer to this? And I'm like, come here, scoot closer. Yeah, don't. You write down what is going on inside of you. Okay, so when I ask this question for you, what does it bring up? Write your answer down. You got to know where you are at and what you're coming to the table with before you step out and start going to find information. Okay, because here's the deal. If you go in and you're just going to like sit on the Google and type in adoption, you're going to get a whole host of not always some good information. Can I get an amen? Yeah. Okay. Right. So get off the Google and what are you coming with? So let's sift through that. Let's sift through what we're coming to the table with. And then knowing what you're bringing to the table, then you can go a little deeper of like, ooh, there's a button here that pushed me. So I need to figure out why it pushed me. So let's go a little bit further and then let's find this information and some extra resources that can come alongside of that, right? So I think it goes back to, yes, that perfectionism when people get upset with me that I will not give them the answers. I get this all the time too, because I have a section in my workbook about finding the right agency. And again, I don't give them the answers, but I do give a lot of questions of what you should be asking some agencies and some professionals, because you better be asking your questions. Don't go off what your BFF said they did 10 years ago with this agency. No. Okay. We're not playing that game. We don't know. Okay. So I'm not going to give you a list of agencies because here's what's going to happen. If I give you a list of agencies, which would be unethical for me to do anyways, but if I gave a list of agencies, I know what adoptive parents will do. That one looks good. Sign me up. Okay? No. You got to know. You got to do your work. And so we have to, as adoptive parents, get rid of this idea of perfectionism, because that's unattainable. You're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes as a parent every day. And even when y'all see me talking about how like, this is hard for me as an adopted mom, walking with my child in this, shoot, have I not made mistakes in those conversations? And guess what I have to do? I have to go back to my child later and say, I screwed up. Sorry. I don't use that language with him, but I will have to say, mommy is sorry. Here is what I did wrong. Okay. So it goes back to, you have to understand what you're bringing to the table. And you're not going to do that if you don't know and this is why I wrote the workbook, because you come to adoption or foster care and you just don't really know what to think. My workbook was born out of me having conversations with other people and me asking them some of these questions, or wishing somebody would have asked me some of these questions, and them saying, I never thought about that. I didn't know that was going to come up. Okay, that's why it's here. So I help you by helping give you a place to start with the questions, but I'm not going to do your work for you. You got to do your work. The end. That's my spiel.
Buy the workbook, bottom line. Andie, close this out, our wonderful closer.
So first of all, I want to reiterate, we literally did just ask her to tell you about the workbook. And I'm going to give you my perspective on the workbook, because I am an adoptee, right? So I'm supposed to be the expert on adoption, right? I got opinions on the word expert, by the way. That's for another triad table. So I got the workbook because we are in the process of adopting again. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll just work through this, see if I'm doing this the right way, just for fun, because Krista's my friend. I'll get the workbook. Holy crap, y'all. I need to go back to therapy. I'm questioning everything I've ever done in my adoption life. I'm questioning how we did our adoption with our daughter. I'm like writing notes in the book, like how to apologize to her and her parents. I'm writing down my list of things to cover in therapy. And like writing down, okay, we did this time, but we're not going to do it again this time. So if you're like, I don't need the workbook, Kevin, get yourself the workbook. And by the way, it is the first of its kind. And I know that because I've been an adoptee for 37 years and there is 0 books for this. Ashley's displaying it. Go buy it. And that's my personal review. Okay, so to really close this out after that spiel, I kind of felt like an infomercial there. So, I'm listening to all of our stories. And again, this is why we've said this before. We're going to say it again. This is why we love this triad table. Our stories are so, so different. And our stories are not just ours. They're connected to different parts of the triad. So we have, there's us, but there's also everybody who's in our lives that we're bringing to the table with us. And our stories are so different. And like we've all said, this concept of open adoption is about relationship. It has to be about relationship. The industry peddles its perfect picture. It markets it. It puts it on its websites and its social media and its pamphlets it sends to you in the mail with the happy post-adoptive couple holding the cute little baby. And all babies aren't cute, by the way. I was not a cute baby. So don't think you're going to get a cute baby, because I had cheeks for days and it was no bueno. I'm going to get yelled at for not being serious about this. So anyway, they peddle you this perfect picture, right? And then you get it ingrained in your head that you have to replicate that picture. That if you cannot present a perfect open adoption, then you shouldn't be in an open adoption. Are we talking about the adoption industry's perfect picture? Or are we talking about the actual relationship picture? I'm going to get Christian on you all. What would Jesus do? Who would he sit with? Would he sit with that woman who is struggling and in addiction? Or would he sit with people like my mom, who is 17 and is scared out of their minds? Or would he want to shut that off and have a closed adoption simply because it's more comfortable? Because we all know the American dream is all about being comfortable, right? So to close it up, this is about relationship. And you need to be willing to address your own crap so that you can walk into relationship for the sake of your adoptee. Because you guys, one day your adoptee is going to be 17 and they're not going to be the perfect baby anymore. And you're going to have to be in relationship to make that open part of your relationship work, your adoption. So that's my closing. Relationship.
Thanks, Andie. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go cry, I think, for a little bit. Thank you all. We will see you next time. Beautiful women, beautiful voices. Goodbye.